Hello everyone. So today we'll discuss blood supply of brain. So first of all, arteries supplying the brain. We have internal carotid artery and vertebral artery. Now further for understanding the blood supply, we'll see this diagram. This is very important in blood supply of brain. Now as you can see here, these are two vertebral arteries. So two vertebral artery they ascend upward near the lower border of the pons. They will unite with each other and form basilar artery. So this is basilar artery. Basilar artery ascend upward and near the upper border of the pons it will divide into posterior cerebral artery. This is posterior cerebral artery. Now this is vertebrobasilar system. Now we'll talk about the carotid, internal carotid artery. This is internal carotid artery. You can see here. This is internal carotid artery. So internal carotid artery has anteriorly, this is anterior cerebral artery. So this artery is anterior cerebral artery and this is middle cerebral artery. So internal carotid artery has anterior cerebral artery, this one, and middle cerebral artery. Now this vertebrobasilar system and internal carotid artery, they both are joined by two arteries. One is posterior communicating, this one, and anterior cerebral artery joined by anterior communicating artery. So as you can see here, there is a circle formed under surface of the brain. This circle is known as circle of Willis. Circle of Willis, also known as circulus arteriosus. Circulus arteriosus. Now after the circle of Willis, look at these three arteries. One is anterior cerebral artery, this one, then middle cerebral artery, this one, and posterior cerebral artery, this one. So you can see here anterior cerebral artery and middle cerebral artery, these are branches of internal carotid artery, and posterior cerebral artery is branch of basilar artery. Now these three arteries divided into two branches, or they provide two set of arteries. These are, one is cortical and another one is central. Now if we talk about the cortical, cortical will supply the cortex of cerebrum. Cortical branches will supply the cortex of the cerebrum. And if we talk about the central artery supply the inner substance of cerebrum, or we can say inner structure of the cerebrum. We have two set of arteries, one is cortical and central. So cortical supply the cortex and central will supply the deep substance of the cerebrum. Now this central artery, they have, one is anteromedial group of central artery, this one. Then these are anterolateral group of central artery, anteromedial group of the central artery, anterolateral group of the central artery, and here we have posteromedial group of the central artery, this one, and these are posterolateral group of the central artery. Now concentrate on the anterolateral group of the central artery. These are These arteries known as striate arteries. These arteries, the arteries of the anterolateral group known as striate artery. They supply the lentiform nucleus and internal capsule. One of these striate artery is larger and responsible for cerebral hemorrhage. That artery is called Charcot's artery. Charcot's artery, or artery of cerebral hemorrhage. So again, this anterolateral group of the central artery known as striate artery. So one of striate artery is larger than the other branches and known as Charcot's artery because this is responsible for cerebral hemorrhage. Now, next in this diagram we can see the branches. So from the vertebral artery you can see here this is anterior spinal artery. Then here you can see this is posterior inferior cerebellar artery, that is pica. Then from the basilar artery this is anterior inferior cerebellar artery, that is ica. Then we have small pontine branches from the basilar artery. This last branch of the basilar artery is superior cerebellar artery. This is superior cerebellar artery, not last, second last, and this is posterior cerebral artery. So posterior cerebral artery is also given by the basilar artery. Posterior inferior cerebellar artery, this branch, and anterior inferior cerebellar artery, this branch. Posterior inferior cerebellar artery is from vertebral artery, anterior inferior cerebellar artery from the basilar artery. Now some clinical points regarding these arteries. So posterior inferior cerebellar artery supply the medulla and cerebellum. There is a condition, if there is a damage of this artery, Wallenberg syndrome. Wallenberg syndrome. And there is a damage of nucleus ambiguous. Nucleus ambiguous, so person will suffer from dysphagia as well as hoarseness. Dysphagia as well as hoarseness in the voice. So this is because of posterior inferior cerebellar artery.